Perry Mason is one of the most popular American TV shows of all time. But even a show like Perry Mason had its faults. Not only that, it had its bloopers too. Join Facts First to see some of the most popular Perry Mason blooper scenes you may have missed. Is this newsworthy? Many of the plots of Perry Mason included showing a newspaper article that pertained to the case. But if you look closer at some episodes, the text of the newspaper article had quite a few errors. For example, in the episode The Case of the Haunted Husband, the story revolves around a truck driver who was hit by a car. But if you look at the newspaper in the episode, it states that a soldier was hit by a car. Perhaps the scriptwriters should have had a chat with the journalists. But this isn't the only newspaper error from the show. There was one episode where we can visibly see a newspaper, but it's actually blank. One can only guess there was nothing truly newsworthy that particular day. Where'd the blow go? There was one episode called The Case of the Crooked Candle, in which a man is murdered due to a massive blow on the head. But when the body is examined, we don't see a single blow on his bald head. One can imagine it was blown away. This is something that wouldn't fly in a TV show today, but we have to remember that when Perry Mason aired, reruns were rare and video recording technology hadn't been invented. The average viewer simply wouldn't notice, and if they did, they wouldn't have a platform like the one you're watching right now to raise the issue. So these types of bloopers continued and they didn't spoil the show. That's a nervous fly. There's a fantastic episode of Perry Mason called The Case of the Nervous Accomplice. But who is this mysterious nervous accomplice? There's one scene when Perry and Della are discussing the case. As they do, a fly shows up on screen for a few seconds. This is because a fly got stuck on the camera lens. Because it was obviously shot on film, it's not something that could be easily or cheaply reshot. Perhaps that fly was the real nervous accomplice. Lieutenant Tragg decided to stay after all. In the episode The Case of the Married Moonlighter, there's a tense scene in a courtroom, as there were in many Perry Mason episodes. In that scene, Lieutenant Tragg states he must leave the courtroom immediately for an urgent matter. He takes the stand, gives his testimony, and then hurries out of the courtroom. But if you look closely, he actually remains seated throughout the entire scene. He doesn't actually leave the courtroom. He continues to sit there during the entire court session. Always carry your running shoes. One of the most pleasantly named episodes is The Case of the Negligent Nymph. In this episode, we see a woman arrive at a house wearing high heels. As she gets closer, it seems her presence is noticed. A man and his dog begin chasing her. Luckily, despite the fact that she's wearing high heels, she manages to get away. That's because all of a sudden, she's not wearing high heels. When she starts running, you can clearly see she's wearing flats. A smart decision on the lady's part, no doubt, but how the heck did she change from high heels to flats so quickly? Take a seat or two. In the episode The Case of the Crying Comedian, there's a character at a bar. However, in the next frame, we see her sitting at a table. Then, without a moment's notice, we see her in another frame sitting at the bar again. I guess she couldn't decide which was the better seat. Does Perry know his grammar? Lawyers have a great reputation for being well-spoken and having an aptitude for rhetoric. They use the English language to convince the jury of their client's innocence. Such marvels of the language are seen in every episode of Perry Mason. But even Perry would make huge grammatical blunders. He often uses the word infer, or a variation of the word, when he should be using the word imply. That's because implying is what someone says and inferring is what someone does after listening. Still, his skills in the courtroom aren't bad. Now let's take a look at a few fascinating trivia tidbits about Perry Mason. Perry Mason trivia. Perry Mason came to life when Raymond Burr was cast. The character already existed from the original novels, but once Raymond was cast in the show, it was hard to imagine anyone else but him in the role. In fact, fans stopped seeing him as Raymond Burr and only saw him as Perry Mason. There was one incident when Raymond was walking on the street when an elderly lady stopped him. She asked how he always won his cases. Raymond Burr laughed and stated it was because the lady only watched the cases that would be aired over the weekend. Oddly enough, Raymond Burr actually wanted to play the character of Hamilton Burger, but it was decided he was the right man to play Perry Mason. This was a wise choice as it was the role that made him a star. In fact, actor William Hopper had auditioned for the role and was about to become Perry Mason. But after Burr auditioned and was chosen, Hopper was cast as Paul Drake instead. Ray Collins played Lieutenant Tragg on the show. Sadly, he had to leave the show early due to health issues. But out of respect, his name continued to be mentioned in the credits of the show until he died. Another reason his name was always mentioned was that so his union would send him money for medical care. The entertainment industry has always had a moral streak at one point or another and has often pushed aside entertainers who didn't match up to the moral code of the day. This was the case with actor William Tallman. He had attended a party that was raided by police. There's not a lot of detail as to what happened at the party, but it's safe to say it wasn't family-friendly. This was enough to tarnish his reputation and get him fired from the show. Sadly, he didn't receive a lot of acting work for the rest of his career. If you watch the show closely, you'll see that very few episodes are a trial with a jury. Most of the cases were a preliminary hearing. This is because a trial would require hiring 12 more actors to play jurors. It's interesting to note that in many of the episodes, the witnesses never swear on the Bible, as was the norm and still is in many courtrooms. The phrase, "so help me God," is never uttered in many places in the show. This might not be that interesting now, but it must have caused some controversy in the more traditional era in which the show was made. Every episode of Perry Mason had the words "the case of" in the title. Normally, "the case of the blank" was the title of the episode. There were only 3 episodes that didn't have this extra "the," but the scriptwriters always wanted to stay consistent with the case of theme to add intrigue to the show. This consistency isn't something we see with modern shows, but it actually tells you directly what each episode is about and it draws you in. Perry Mason had its bloopers here and there, but at the end of the day, even if you notice them today, it doesn't detract from the classic show that it is. The show ran for 271 episodes and became an American institution. Both the novels and the show remain popular to this day, and they've inspired a new remake which has gained some popularity as well. While some purists will always prefer the original, others will be open to the remake of Perry Mason. All we can hope for is that we won't see a nervous fly show up on the camera lens, and hopefully some more jury trials to get some more actors some work. Now it's time to hear from you. Are you a fan of Perry Mason? Did you know about these bloopers, and have they affected the way you view the show or your favorite episodes? Let us know in the comments section below.